So, welcome back to Gorilla Presents. After a brief hiatus post-COVID, we all had so much Zoom fatigue, I just couldn't face it, to be honest. We're thrilled to relaunch with a splash. This is our second Gorilla Presents. The last one was about myths and disinformation on social media. And if you've missed it, check out the recording when one of my assistants is going to put the link in the chat. For those of you new to Gorilla, Gorilla is a platform that allows you to go far, far beyond surveys. We have core tooling, which includes a survey tool, also a task builder tool for those classic psychological reaction time tasks, and an experiment builder for linking them together in all sorts of lovely paradigms. But today we're going to be talking about more novel protocols using Gorilla, so UX UI simulations for cyber psychology research and UX UI research. I'm going to introduce our two speakers. We have Jamie, who is probably at the bottom of your screen, waving just now. He's a research specialist here at Gorilla Experiment Builder. He completed an MSc in brain imaging and cognitive neuroscience at the University of Birmingham. And then later he returned to Keele University for his PhD in psychology, where he investigated the role of stimulus format and distinctiveness in the recognition and establishment of novel photograph superiority effect. He is eager to meet researchers from a range of disciplines to discuss how Gorilla can empower them to move their research outside of the lab. And then we've also got Johanna Tomczak, who works as a research specialist at Gorilla too, and she completed her degree in France, I believe in computer science, before obtaining a PhD in cognitive psychology from the University in Leeds in the UK. Her thesis examined the impact of bilingualism and aging on the communication between cerebral hemispheres, and has shown her the benefit of online research as she decided to join Gorilla to work on improving behavioral science as a whole. Today's webinar is all about website simulations. We know that many of you have wanted to run website, app, or social media simulations, and in this workshop, we're going to show you how to do it. Today, what we're going to cover is a case study of how we've used Gorilla in our own UX teams, a demonstration of frequently used components to create simple website simulations, and then we'll have a Q&A session. As you can imagine, building the simple techniques that you use to build a simple simulation are the same techniques you use to build a more complex simulation, and you're only limited by your imagination. If you have questions as we go, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. That's a separate bit from the webinar chat. There's a Q&A section, because then what will happen is panelists will either be able to answer them as they go, or we'll be able to pick them up at the end. Today's session is being recorded and will be available on the Be Online conference website alongside 100+ other talks about running studies online. And I think my wonderful assistant will be putting the link to the Be Online conference page as well in there, although it's a similar one. At Be Online, we cover online research in great detail, in particular drawing a focus on methodological best practice for online studies so that you get the best possible data quality. It really is a fantastic resource. Don't forget to check it out. So first up, I'm going to hand over to Gorilla research specialist Johanna Tomczak, who's going to give us a little introduction into website simulations.
Thank you, Jo. Okay, let me share my screen with you first, and then we'll get started. So what I want you to have a look at first is a little video that shows us how UX and UI simulations could work in Gorilla. Let me just play this. So first of all, what Gorilla can do is you can recreate websites by just importing the screenshots you have of your own website. And that allows you then to make specific components of that website interactable. For example, here you can see how this works in the task builder. You've got click responses and hotspot components, which you can layer up on top of your screen. This example here was actually created with the task builder, and while it looks like a real website design, it is actually just within the builder. Here, the same applies to the phone format. We've just got an app here, and in that app, our participants or users can put in their comments in Word format, and we will then get their responses. Here you can see how the responses are recorded in Gorilla. You've got the reaction times and the actual words participants put in the boxes. This now leads us to an experiment design where we could do some A/B testing. and also some more complicated website simulations where participants can interact with the given page. And this here is my favorite example of how that could work, because we've actually used that ourselves in our UX team in Gorilla to carry out a user experience test. We've redesigned our own website and then tested that on our participants. Now, this was just a very quick overview, but let's get started in our real project. I'm going to share my screen with you again, and I've created a project folder which we will be using today. Here's our project folder. You can see that we already have 2 tasks, which are up and up for a different color. And Jamie will have a look at these in just a minute. But before he does, I need to add him as a collaborator to this project so he can take over. I'm going to do that by just clicking on Settings, Collaborate, and then I'm going to search for Jamie in here by just putting in his email address. Let me find Jamie. I've got his email address there, Cauldron. There we've got our Jamie. I'm going to let him make changes and be able to view the data. And once I've done that, Jamie is now able to access the project on his side, and he will guide us through how to set up the app. We want to build an example mobile design sign-up flow in Gorilla, and I'm handing over to Jamie now to show us how to do that.
Thank you, Johanna. Let me share my screen. And I think I'm in the right project folder here. So this is the one that Johanna's just added me to. Yeah, so we're going to be creating an app simulation today, and we're going to go into this task here named app. Now, we've already set up one of these screens in advance, which will be coming to you later. But we are going to start from a blank slate here, so we can show you how to set all this stuff up from scratch. So to get started, the first thing I'm going to do is open a new edit so we can start editing this task. And we're going to come into this first blank screen. So Gorilla offers us some templates here. Those are not going to be useful for our purposes. We're going to start with a completely blank screen as we have a very specific idea of what we want this simulation to look like. So here we have our completely blank canvas. The first thing that I'm going to do to start setting up this simulation is add a background image. So to do that, I'm going to come to our Stimulate tab over here and upload my background image. So for this particular simulation, I'm using a background which is quite a plain white background, and then we have a phone in the middle. And now we're going to kind of superimpose content on top of that phone, so it looks like we're working our way through the app, basically. So if we head back to our builder screen now, we can add an object, and we have many different objects here on Gorilla. I'm going to start with an image zone here. So here we're given a placeholder. I'm going to call this background, give it a slightly better name, and I'm going to choose that phone background that I've just uploaded. So here in the live preview, we can see what that looks like to participants. So obviously at the moment, it's far too small. So I'm going to make this image huge so it fills up our entire canvas. And that's quite a powerful feature when making simulations like this. We'll often have a full background image that takes up all of the space, and then we put content on top of that. So the next thing I'm going to do is add some introductory information here that tells participants a little bit about what they're going to be doing in this experience. So I'm going to add objects, and I'm going to add some markdown text. So markdown text is really useful as it also allows formatting. So here we have like headings, we have bold, italics, bullet points, etc. So it's really useful for customizing your text and getting it to look a specific way. I'm going to rename the subject again. So call this info. And I'm going to copy and paste some text that I've already prepared. So here we have some welcome text. It says, thanks for using the Gorilla app, and a bit of information about what they're going to be doing and how long this is going to take. You can also see here that I've used HTML formatting throughout here. So to space things out, to change the color of some text, to add this horizontal rule. Very easy to add little HTML tags that kind of drastically alter how the text looks here. I'm going to make this text a little bit smaller. And then the next thing I'm going to do is add something called an overlay component. So I'm going to add this here underneath our text zone. And overlays are very important, especially for this type of simulation. So what an overlay does is it keeps one object the same size relative to another object. So here in this case, we can say that the target is the background, so our big background phone image, and this text is overlaid on top of that. What that means is if participants are viewing this study on different devices, different size screens, this text will always stay in the same position and same size relative to the background. So it's really useful for making sure that text doesn't kind of spill out of bounds from where we'd want it to, get too big, too small. Really valuable feature when setting up this type of simulation. You're going to hear me repeat that a lot today, unfortunately. So every single thing I add will have an overlay component on it pointed to the background. So you may get sick of hearing me mention that, but it is very important. So I'm just going to change the size of this box. So we want this red border to be around all the content here. So I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger, not that big. And I'm going to put this right in the middle. So the numerical coordinates here on the right-hand side of the screen, this can be really useful, especially if you want something to be presented directly in the middle of the screen. So here I'll set this to 0, 0, so we know our text is right in the center. Okay, so we have our first screen set up there, which looks pretty good. We have this phone, we have some content coming through. The next thing we need to set up is a way for the participant to get to the next screen. So some kind of next button. And Gorilla makes that very easy. So we can add an object here and we can do a search here through the Gorilla objects for a button. And we can add a button like this. So this is a custom button. We can add whatever label we like. So here I'm going to just add next, for example. And then we could also add the overlay component onto this button. The problem with this approach is it's not very customizable in terms of how it looks. So this button is always red. It always has this white text, which is probably fine for like 99% of the time. But when we're creating a simulation like this, chances are we have a specific style in mind and we want that style to match everything else we're seeing in the app. So I'm going to get rid of this Gorilla button and I'm going to show you how to create your own custom button that can look however you like. And then the styling can be spot on and align with everything else. So to do that, I'm going to go back to our stimuli tab where we uploaded our background. And I'm going to add some of my own custom next buttons. And just upload those. So this is very simple. It's easy to create buttons like this yourself in Photoshop or Microsoft Paint or something like that. It's essentially just a rectangle with rounded edges with some text in the middle. I like to create 3 different versions. So I have what I call a normal version. That's the button that we see by default. We have a hover version. So when you hover the mouse over the button, it changes color slightly just to give the user some feedback that this is indeed a button that's clickable. And then we also have this clicked version, which again is just a nice bit of user feedback that makes it feel more realistic, makes it feel more like a real button you would find on a website. So if we come back to our builder screen here now, I'm going to add another object. And rather than a normal image zone, like we added for the background, I'm going to do a search for image. And this is the one I'm looking for, image hover. So what this does is it changes the image when we hover the mouse over this zone. And that's going to be really useful for creating these custom buttons. So first, I'm going to change the name to be more descriptive. So this is going to be my next button. And then here you can see we have 3 different image inputs here. So I'm going to choose the normal version of my next button, the hover version of my next button, and the complete version. If we press play here, we can see that in action. So when I hover the mouse over this button, it changes color, and that's our hovered version. We won't actually see the clicked one yet, but we'll come to that a bit later on. So next, again, I'm going to add this overlay component to lock the size of this button to the background so it always stays the same size. I'm going to adjust the size slightly. So something you may have noticed before is when this red box is too big, it activates the hover kind of when we get close to the button, but not within it. So here you can see it's activating when we're not actually on the button. So we want that red border to really enclose the content as closely as possible. So something like this. And then I'm going to set the position directly in the middle, and I want it to be a bit lower, bottom of the screen there. So again, if we hit play, we can see what things look like to the participant. It looks quite nice. We have this button that hovers when we put the mouse over it. It's not actually a button at the moment. It is just an image that changes when we hover. So what we need to do now is turn this image into a button by adding another component. So you'll notice here, I'm often enhancing the functionality of existing objects here by building up these components. And I'm going to add a component here called click response. So this captures a response when this object is clicked on. And I'm going to say, when this object is clicked on, record the response next. If I hit play now, we can test that out. So we can see on the debug window here on the right, what Gorilla is doing behind the scenes, basically. So we can see that Gorilla has received the response next. We've moved on to the next page. So that all looks good. We're nearly there. The one last thing I'd like to set up now is, which I mentioned previously, is I'd like to show this dark clicked version for just a very short moment. So at the moment when users click next, the page will immediately progress instantly. We just want the page to hang around for just a short moment so we can see that user feedback and it just feels a bit more responsive and realistic. So to do that, we come to the screen tab here. Excuse me. So everything we've been looking at so far has been on the objects tab here. We're now on the screen tab, and this is what controls how the screen ends and where we go next. So here I'm going to add a component called feedback time. And so this does, when the screen is complete, wait for an amount of time before advancing. And typically that's used to allow feedback to display. So we might display like a green tick if someone gets a question right, or a red X if someone gets something wrong, and we want to show that for, half a second before they move on to the next trial. We're going to hijack that functionality and just use that to show our clicked button for a little bit. So if I put a fairly long time here, so 1,000 milliseconds, and we hit play, we should be able to see that in action. So if I hit next now, we can see that the response was received, and then 1 second later, the screen finished, which is good. That's what we want. We just want to speed that up a bit. So I'm going to put 200 milliseconds is quite a nice balance and feels realistic. So if we try that again, we can see there's just a very short pause before we move on to the next screen. So I think this is now a good time to do a full preview. So we've just been using this live preview up till now, but we can do a full preview that will fill the screen and show us what the participant sees by going up here and hitting start. So what we can test now is we can see the overlay in action. So if I change the size of this window that we're viewing, it might not be that obvious to you guys that I'm changing the window. I'm not sure how this looks for you, but I'm changing the size of the window. And what you can notice is the next button always stays the same size relative to the background. The text stays the same size relative to the background. That means nothing ever spills out the bounds of the phone or ends up looking weird. It stays locked in, which is very nice. We have a nice button that hovers when we put the mouse over it. If we press next, we should see that this shows the clicked version for a very short time, and then it's going to move on to the second screen, which we set up ahead of this session. So if I do that now. So this is our second screen, and I'm going to back out and I'll show you how I set this up. So to set up this second screen, we use all the same functionality that we've just demonstrated. So first off, we have our full page background, which is in the same position, the same size. So participants don't necessarily know that we're moving on to a different page in Gorilla. It just looks like the content is updating. We have some new text. We have our custom next button still. The only difference on this page is we have a drop-down object. So here I make use of that for this gender question, where I ask if you're male, female, other. And it's very easy to just put different options in here And again, we use overlay to lock that to the background. And likewise, we have a number entry for the age. So this is specifically for numbers only, which is really good for typing in age, making sure you don't get any weird data because it doesn't allow letters. Cool. So that all looks good. It's we're missing a bit of functionality here that would kind of take this app to the next level. So what we're going to work on adding now is a pop-up, basically. So it'd be quite nice to have a help button that users can click, and then additional information pops up that will help them out, and then they can back out of that and close that afterwards. That's a very powerful thing. You can do a lot with this functionality. Yeah, it's especially useful for any type of website simulation, is having the ability for information to dynamically appear and disappear. So that's what we're going to look at now. So to set that up, I'm going to go back to the stimuli tab here, where we put all of our other image assets. And I'm going to add a bunch of stuff that relate to this help button that I've been working on. And I'll explain what each of these images are. So there we go. So the first one that's worth mentioning is this question mark bubble. So this is going to be our button that users click to get that additional information. Again, we have a normal version of that button, and we have a hover version, so we get that nice feeling when we're clicking it. This is our information that will pop up. The beauty of having this as an image is that we can style it however you want. You can make it as detailed or complex as you want. Stylistically, you can match everything else if you want. There's quite a few benefits to having it as an image over just raw text written in Gorilla. And then finally, we also have this X button. So in order to close the pop-up, we have this very small X button. And again, normal version and a hover version. So that looks like a lot there, but we're going to add this one at a time and kind of build it out slowly. So the first thing I'm going to add is the button, the question mark help button. And we're going to set this up exactly the same way that we set up this custom next button. So I'm going to add an object, do a search for image hover, and add that in. I'm just going to drag this over here so we can get a better view of what we're doing. So I'm going to give this a name. I'm going to call it help. And then I'm going to select the normal version of the help button and the hover version here. Now, in this case, I don't think we need a complete version. This button will be repeatedly clickable. They can click it as much as they like. So it doesn't kind of make sense to have a clicked version here. So we're going to skip that bit. I can't skip, however, adding an overlay. So I'm going to add that and point it to the background again. I'm again going to change the size because we don't want this to hover too soon. We want it to hover only when we touch this bit. So I'm going to make this much smaller. And then I'm going to put it into a logical place as well. So I think we're going to go to the top right corner up here. So if I hit play now, you can see we have a new button here, which hovers when we put the mouse over it. Again, this is not a button just yet. It's just an image. So we need to come back to this help object and add click response functionality to make it click. So I'm going to add a click response, and when this is clicked on, I want to record the response help. And if we do a live preview there, we can see this in action on the debug window here. So if I click help here, we can see that Gorilla hears the response help and the page moves on. So something to note is that Gorilla will automatically advance to the next page when we hear a response. That's like the default behavior of Gorilla. For website simulations, that's probably not desired. We probably want participants to be able to click and interact with a few things before the page moves on. So there's one thing we need to set up to prevent that from happening. And again, we can do that from the screen tab here. So the screen tab controls when the page moves on or where we go next. So I'm going to add a component here called advance response. And what this does is it only advances the screen when a specific response is received. And I'm going to put next in here. So no matter what response is received on this page, we only move on to the next page if next is received. And we can preview that here. If I click our help button, we can see that Gorilla's heard that help button and recorded it to our data. We can click that a few times. But if I click the next button, that's also heard, but that's the one that advances us. That can be quite powerful functionality for a website simulation as well. Okay, so next we're going to make the actual pop-up information appear. So when this is clicked, we want to use that response to make our information appear. I'm first going to add just a regular image, and this is going to hold our pop-up info. So there's our pop-up info. I'm going to give this a better name. I'm going to call it info. So it's always good to give your objects a unique name that tells you what it is, as when you're looking at the data later, it'll make your life a lot easier. I'm going to add overlay again, point that to the background and give this a better size. And I want that right in the middle, but we'll probably want it to pop up next to the button. Cool. So if we hit play now, what we're going to see is that that button's there by default. So when the screen starts, we have this image covering our title, covering some of this info, and participants haven't even asked for help yet. So that's not desirable. We don't want that to happen. And this is where I'm going to demonstrate probably the most powerful functionality that Gorilla offers for this type of website simulation. It's called Trigger Visible. And what it does is it makes things visible or invisible based on responses that a user gives. So basically, I like to think of it as turning on and off different light switches. We can make different elements appear and disappear based on what our user does. It's super powerful. So I'm going to add it to this info text here. I'm going to do a search for trigger visible. So we do have a number of other different trigger options, but trigger visible is the one we're going to demonstrate today. And we can add a bunch of different triggers. The first one I'm going to add relates to the screen start. So I'm going to say our trigger here is the screen starting. And then I'm going to say, make this item invisible when the screen starts. So if I press play now, we can see that our info box is not visible when the screen starts. So that's really good. We then need to add a second trigger that makes it appear when we receive this help response. So if I add a second trigger underneath this first one, this time I'm going to choose response. So I don't know if you can see this drop down, but we have a number of different things we can use as triggers. I'm selecting response. And we don't want it set to any response. We want this to happen when we receive the response. And what that will do is change the visibility to visible. And if we try that now, we should find that when we click this, our pop-up appears, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. So the last thing we need to set up here is a way to close this pop-up. So at the moment, if users do press help, they see the pop-up, which is good, but it persists on the screen, which can be pretty annoying and is not very realistic of what a pop-up would do online. So we're going to add a little X up the corner that allows participants to close that pop-up and get rid of it. So I'm going to add another image object, although it's going to be an image hover again. And drag this out the way so you can see what I'm doing here. I'm going to give this a good name. So I'm going to call this close. And then I'm going to select our X buttons. So I have a normal one and a hover one, which looks like this, just very simple. Again, I'm going to add overlay, tie that to the background so that I can give it a size and put it in the appropriate place. So I'm going to put it just in the top corner of our pop-up there. So if I hit play here, the first thing we're going to notice is that we have the same problem we did with that pop-up where it's appearing when the screen starts. So we need to fix that with trigger visible again. The first thing I need to do though is turn that into a button. So right now it is just an image. So I'm going to add a click response so that when this X is pressed, we register a new response called close. And then I'm going to add our trigger. So I'm going to again say when the screen starts, this X is invisible. And when a specific response is received, that response being help, make this X appear. So that should have fixed that initial issue. So now there's nothing here until we press this. And then we can click the X. And the very, very last thing we need to do here is look at this new response that the X gives, this close response, and use that to make these elements disappear again. So we're actually adding a third trigger now. So for this info box, I'm going to add my third trigger, which looks for, again, it looks for a response as it did before, but it's looking for a different response this time. That response being closed, and that makes it invisible again. And again, we're going to add that same trigger to our X. So if response close is received, go invisible. And that should be it. So if we hit play now, we should find that we have a nice pop-up that comes up when we want to see that extra information. We can then hover over the X and see that it lights up, which tells us that it's clickable. We can click that, which uses that response to turn it off. And we can do this as many times as we want. We can respond to these questions first and click it halfway through. And the beauty of this is Gorilla records all of these actions in order with the reaction times by default. So if we look at our data, we have a very clear record of all the steps that participants took, when they pressed the help button, how many times they pressed it, how long they spent on this page before they pressed next. So I think that's about all we're going to set up for this particular app today. So the next thing I want to do is just save this. So I'm going to go to the big green commit button here, and I'm going to leave a helpful message for me and Johanna to see what I've done here today. So I might say, I did first info screen and pop up and press commit. So that might seem like a chore, adding a message like that, but it can come in real useful later down the line. So it's basically version history. So if we look at actions and look at history here, we can see all the previous versions of our task. So we can see where we first started and all of our previous saves. We can view them and restore them whenever we like. So very useful. It means we can't actually ever lose any progress. If you accidentally delete everything, you can always go back to a previous save. So it's good to commit often with a helpful message that keeps you and your collaborators updated as to what you did. So I think that's all I'm going to cover now. So I'm going to hand you back over to Johanna now, who is going to put this into an experiment and show you some extra little bits as well.
Thanks, Jamie. That looked really cool. And now that we've got all the details, we will have a look at a bit more broader stuff. Let me share my screen again with you. And we are going to have a look at our project folder here again. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that we have this app, which Jamie was working on. We also have a second version of that app, which is just with a different color. So I'm just going to show you what it looks like. It's essentially exactly the same, just that this time we're using the typical Gorilla Red. And now that we've got the two different apps, what we could do is in our experiment, send half of the participants to one colored app and half of the participants to the other version of our app. We also have an example shop here. This is just to show you other tools you could combine with a website simulation and which are often used. Let me show you. You might have used Shop Builder before, but if you haven't, this is really quite simple to set up. I just need to choose a few settings here. And once I've done that, we can preview what our shop looks like at the moment. So this is about birthday surprises, and I can find all sorts of goods in here. For example, some books, food, or jewelry. And once I have decided on an item that I wanted to buy, I can just add that to the basket, and you can see it now appears in our basket. We can then increase the number of items we want, or make that smaller again, and then advance to the checkout or search for an item in the search bar here. If I click on checkout, this now allows me to review my basket, and then I've got that final decision to make. Yes, I am finished. I want to purchase this. This now provides our shop builder data here, which you can download in the similar way as to all our other tooling. This is everything we've got in this example shop. And then there's just one last task, which I wanted to show you here, which is the social media demo. Now, those of you who have attended our last webinar, you will be familiar with this. This social media demo was created by using the social media zone, which we've just recently added to our tooling. So this allows you to create some social media posts. And if you now preview this specific task, what I can do here is I can react to the post by choosing an emoji, for example, this one here. I can repost this to my timeline, and I can comment on this page. For example, I have seen it. And then once I post this, you can see this appears on my account. This is all created in Gorilla. So what that means is that we are at the same time collecting the reaction times and the clicks of our participants. So we'll get the exact timings of those. This was actually our Gorilla Presents last month, sorry. And here the same, we can react to this, we can repost it to our timeline, or we can comment on this post here. And if we now click on next, this is the end of our social media demo here. Again, we can download that preview data if we wanted to. Now, this was just a quick overview to show you all the different other tasks we've got here. The aim of that is to show you that we can now put all of that together into one experiment and collect data from participants going through all of those tasks. So we do that by just clicking on experiments here and then choosing the experiment builder. I'm going to leave the name as it is, experiment is fine, and then going to click on create. Now on this experiment builder, I now need to click on edit first. And once I've done that, I will add the different tasks I've created one by one as nodes to this experiment tree. I can choose them from task here and then click on, let's start with the app. And I need to add them one by one to my canvas here. For the second one, I'm going to choose the different app we want to use. This is our second version. And then I'm also going to add the shop we've got, and I'm going to add the social media demo just after that. Once I've done that, what we will do is we will connect everything from start to finish, because we need to make sure that participants go in a logical way through this experiment. We will start with them going through the social media component. That's for all of our participants. After that, all of our participants will go to the example shop, so they can choose a birthday gift. And after that, what I want to happen is that half of my participants go to the app first version, and half of them go to the second version we have created with a different color. To be able to do that in Gorilla, what we need is a different node, which we add to our experiment tree. This is called the randomizer node, and it allows us to create different groups, which we send down different paths of our experiment. So here we're just going to give this group a name. I'm going to call it group 1, and I'm going to enter the ratio. So that means that every other participant will go to this group. Now this group is going to be group 2, and the ratio, again, I want to make that 1. So we are attributing participants equally to those two groups here. Once I've set that up, I can just click on save. And I've got my randomizer node here. This can go below our example shop, and I'm just connecting that to the randomizer. And now group 1 will go to the version 1, which Jamie created, and then to the finish node. And group 2 will go to our different colored app version, and then again to the finish node. Now that we've set this up, what we should really do is preview this entire experiment to make sure everything works from start to finish. This can be done with the preview button here. As I've showed you everything already, I'm not going to do that. We know this should all work, but really in real life, we should preview this as many times as we can to make sure everything works. I'm instead going to commit this version, which again means we are saving the current version of all our nodes. So I'm just going to add shop, social media, and app. I'm going to commit this. This is my message for the later self, so I can remember what I've done. Now, in the recruitment tab, this is where we would now set up our recruitment. So we could change the recruitment target, for example, to make this 10 participants. We can request those tokens from our subscription. In the recruitment policy, we would now set up how we want to recruit our participants. Once we have then chosen a recruitment policy, we can start collecting participants and they will come in here and show up. And then finally, what we can do is download our data once a few participants have completed our study. This is all explained in more detail in the onboarding webinar. So if you're interested in that, you can just click on support here and attend our onboarding webinar, where we'll cover all the parts of the experiment builder in a lot more detail. Now that we've seen how this type of task can be set up, I would like to show you a last example of how we've done this usability test in Gorilla. That's the example I was speaking of when we had a look at the little video before. Now, here at Gorilla, we want to make sure that our tools are user-friendly as possible. At the moment, our development team is working hard on creating Data Studio, a tool that will allow you to combine and merge data across versions and nodes of your experiment and reorder those. I've got the Data Studio usability test here, and I'm just going to show you how this looks like and how we've used the different components Jamie has shown us today to make this test work. So let me just show you a preview first of what's actually in this test. First of all, we've got just some generic screenshots here. We're explaining what participants will have to do. And then what we do is we've got this screenshot of what Data Studio might look like. We are now able to click on different components of this page, and that will change the look of the page. Behind the scenes, we are actually staying just within our task builder. So we're not on the real website. This is all just faked with images. You can see that that is the case, because if I now wanted to click on something else here, this doesn't work. So we've really got a very selected functionality here, which we've got restricted. So we're able to really study user behavior on the components we want to concentrate on. Now, once I've done that, I can also navigate to this different tab, and you can see again, we've changed the outlook of things here. We've moved to a different tab. Behind the scenes, Gorilla is now recording clicks and reaction times so that we can interpret them later and figure out which part of the tooling here was easy to use and which part we should really improve, because at the moment, our participants haven't found where to find that specific button, for example. Now, this is everything for the Gorilla Data Studio, which I wanted to show you. I'm just going to continue a bit on here. I want to take out the destructor task, I think. There we go. And then hand over to screens and pages. And I can then just go through this entire test. Now that we've had a look at that, I'm just going to stop my screen sharing